Gaveling in the hearing. The Subcommittee on Homeland Security will come to order. During today's virtual hearing, members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. When you are recognized to speak, if I notice that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. To avoid inadvertent background noise, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participant microphones when they are not recognized to speak. If there's a technology issue during a member's speaking time, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. We will be following the 5-minute rule. With 1 minute remaining in your time, the clock will turn yellow. When your time has expired, the clock will turn red, and it will be time to recognize the next member. We will follow the speaking order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member, followed by members present at the time of the hearing is called to order in order of seniority, and we will alternate by party. Next, we will go to the members who were not present when the hearing was called to order until every member present has had a first round. Members can submit information in writing at any of our hearings or markups using the email address provided in advance to your staff. Now let's begin. Today, I welcome Tay Johnson, Acting Director of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. He is here to discuss ICE's management of its resources and its operational priorities. Thank you for being here this morning. Acting Director Johnson, as a career civil servant, you have been asked to step into this interim role as ICE Director, and we appreciate your service in this capacity. We have spoken about some of the recent challenges you and the Secretary face, and I want to reaffirm my commitment to help you both address them. We have seen many important retractions of the prior administration's policies that abrogated the rights of asylum seekers and others. Those policies drove a wedge between ICE and many communities, particularly large migrant populations. There are significant disagreements about immigration policy in this country and among members of this subcommittee. My own view is that we should not simply accept approaches that divide us, but instead work together to find appropriate solutions to balance immigration enforcement with due process and balance removals with humanitarian considerations. We have a lot of work left to do, but if we are truly to address the challenges of immigration, it is critical that we fix our broken immigration system. That is why it is critical for Congress to pass the President's Immigration Reform Bill, H.R. 1177, and other important legislation like the American Dream and Promise Act. One issue that I'm particularly alarmed by is the increasingly high number of detainees in ICE custody. This increased number not only puts at risk the lives of detainees, including those who pose no threat to our communities, but it endangers the lives of ICE and detention facility personnel and the communities in which they live. We have a public health imperative to find a way to address this issue. I'm also concerned about ICE's relationships with communities around the country. ICE must find a better way to balance fulfilling its important mission and respecting the important mission of local law enforcement. It is unfortunate that the prior administration's aggressive interior enforcement policies placed demands on many local law enforcement agencies that has compromised the trust they work so hard to nurture in their communities. As you know, that trust is strained in many places by concerns about abusive law enforcement practices. We should not be adding to that erosion of trust with immigration enforcement pressures from ICE. Victims and witnesses to crimes must feel safe in coming forward. It is my hope ICE can find a way to work collaboratively with our local law enforcement agencies. And I look forward to working with you and this administration to build that trust with communities and colleagues concerned about this issue. A good place to start is by increasing transparency and collaboration with nonprofit community organizations which provide shelter along with legal assistance, trauma counseling, and other services to migrants. Lastly, I would like to recognize the important work and accomplishments of the Homeland Security Investigations workforce. I especially commend them for their work in combating the criminal activity related to vaccines, personal protective equipment, and attempts to steal CARES Act funding meant for families and small businesses. It is now my pleasure to turn to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, Ranking Member Fleischman, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Acting Director Johnson, welcome, sir. I would first like to thank you for your decades of service protecting this country. Your commitment and leadership over the years with INS and now ICE are greatly appreciated. I would also like to thank you for stepping up to serve as the acting director before and during the presidential transition. This is a difficult job under the best of circumstances, but I know the agency and the men and women who serve with you are in good hands. And again, sir, I thank you. It is unfortunate that we don't have the fiscal 2022 budget at this time, at the time of this hearing. You may or may not know, but ICE funding, and especially detention bed funding, is usually one of the last details that gets worked out in our conference negotiations. And I would like to see what marker the president is putting down to show his commitment to a safe and orderly immigration system. ICE is a crucial component in our ability to enforce immigration, customs, and trade laws in our country. To try to limit or minimize the nation's laws enacted to protect our country by withholding funds is simply irresponsible. And to demand that the agency responsible for enforcing those national security laws be dismantled is unconscionable. We need a strong, effective, transparent, and accountable ICE. I have consistently advocated for a funding level for ICE that enables ICE to fulfill its law enforcement mission, including funding detention facilities. I am dismayed that the president's order to no longer apprehend persons illegally in this country is linked to a scarcity of resources. I believe everyone on the subcommittee now has a responsibility to pass a bill that has adequate funds for ICE to perform its mission to enforce immigration laws on the books, not just three categories as arbitrarily determined by the president. I know that the officers and teams at Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, do amazing work tackling some of the most heartbreaking cases and taking down some very bad actors. HSI funding is an example where we have agreements on both sides of the aisle. However, if we don't recognize that these very criminal organizations that we're investigating and pursuing are being fueled and funded by the waves of illegal migration we refuse to stop, I don't think we will ever be able to effectively shut down these transnational criminal enterprises. We need to act, and I remain hopeful that we can work together to find a resolution to keep our nation safe. Thank you again, Mr. Johnson, for being with us this morning. I very much look forward to your testimony. Madam Chairwoman, I yield back. Thank you.
Acting Director Johnson, we will submit the full text of your official statement for the hearing record. Please begin your opening statement, which I would ask you keep to 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Roybal Allard, Ranking Member Fleischman, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee of Homeland Security. It's an honor to appear before you today representing the 20,000 outstanding professionals of ICE. Because the FY22 President's budget has not yet been submitted to Congress, I am unable to address any specific details at this time. That said, I will discuss our operational challenges, impacts of working in a COVID-19 environment, in our efforts to remain nimble and forward-leaning in response to changing operational needs. As you are well aware, we are continuing to experience a wave of families and unaccompanied children arriving along the southwest border. At the border, our goal is to ensure border security while supporting an immigration system that is orderly, efficient, fair, and humane. Currently, the majority of those being apprehended along the southwest border are single adults who are being expelled under Title 42. This has proven to be critical to ICE's efforts to ensure adequate space for social distancing and reduce the spread of COVID-19 in our detention facilities. ICE is concerned that the loss of Title 42 could create additional pressure on our immigration system. One other concern we face is Mexico's limited capacity. When Mexico's capacity is reached, we process the families and place them in proceedings in the United States. We have partnered with community-based organizations to test families and quarantine them under COVID-19 protocols. In some locations, the processing of families have strained our resources. This cannot be sustained unless we receive sufficient funding to keep these families safe after they cross the border. On February 18, I issued guidance that requires ICE staff to focus on 3 presumed priorities: national security, border security, and public safety. Although this guidance set forth certain priorities, anyone in the U.S. illegally is still subject to arrest and removal. In the first 2 calendar months following the implementation of this guidance, arrests that meet the presumed priority criteria are up. For example, in March, there were 645 arrests that meet these criteria, and in April, there were 1,552. This is higher than every preceding month going back to April 2020. Similarly, arrests for non-citizens who have committed certain serious crimes are up. In March, ICE arrested 280 non-citizens whose most serious offense is assault. In April, ICE arrested 264. This is higher than all preceding months this fiscal year. The same is true for weapon offenses and DUIs. Consistent with this guidance, ICE will continue to focus on the most pressing national security, border security, and public safety threats. Through prioritization, we hope to achieve even greater success in this regard. Following the issuance of the interim guidance, ICE was able to quickly develop and deploy supporting technology and systems. ICE is working with CBP on the Unified Immigration Portal, a technical solution that will connect relevant data from across the immigration lifecycle to enable more complete and understanding of one's immigration journey. Additionally, to better identify long-term needs and solutions, ICE has begun the development of a data modernization plan and roadmap that will allow us to properly assess the current and future data needs across all of ICE. This plan will allow ICE to identify forward-leaning solutions and identify the resources needed. I hope to work with this committee over the next few months as this plan is developed. Over the last 2 decades, transnational organized crime has transformed in size, scope, and impact, posing a significant threat to national and international security. ICE's strategy seeks to build, balance, and integrate sophisticated analytical tools and techniques to combat transnational crime and related threats to our national security, and urge our foreign partners to do the same. ICE continues to prioritize the investigation and disruption of TCOs that illicitly introduce fentanyl, heroin, and other dangerous opioids into the United States. Continued congressional support for ICE's criminal investigative mission is vitally important. In closing, I want to thank you again for inviting me to testify before you today. I am honored and extremely humbled to represent the dedicated employees of ICE as they continue to keep our border secure, enforce our laws, and stay true to our values and principles.
Thank you, Director. Director Johnson, since you issued the interim guidance on civil immigration enforcement and removal priorities, interior arrests have gone down. And we know that cases involving individuals considered threats to national security or public safety often take more time and more resources. I heard you discuss in your opening statement, but I would ask you if you could please further characterize what changes you've seen in the types of arrests being made since the implementation of the interim guidance. For example, have arrests of individuals with convictions for criminal sexual offenses or other serious convictions changed?
Sure. Just as you mentioned in your question, while the overall arrests have certainly gone down a bit, the arrests of folks that meet our presumed priorities have actually gone up. One category or a couple of categories of folks where we've actually seen the arrests increase are those convicted of domestic violence, sexual offenses, and DUIs is another good example. So, I mean, I think while the overall apprehensions are down, I think when you have officers focusing on what they believe are the worst of the worst, then they're actually much more able to make a more meaningful impact on public safety. And I think that's what you're seeing.
Okay. Well, as you work with the Secretary to develop the final guidance, it really is imperative to address the important context of mitigating factors in a way that clearly distinguishes between people with a criminal history who continue to pose a threat and those who don't. For example, a person who committed a low-level drug offense 20 years ago has not engaged in any serious criminal activity since, and for whom there is no other aggravating circumstances, is unlikely to be a threat to public safety today. It is my understanding that ICE has not conducted an agency-wide individualized assessment of each detainee in its custody to determine whether continued detention is appropriate under the interim guidance priorities. Currently, reviews of detainees are only carried out based on a specific request from or on behalf of the detainee. But it appears that those reviews do not weigh each detainee's circumstances against the interim guidance. Will ICE commit to doing this more thorough review, especially in light of the public health imperative to address the unacceptably high number of COVID positive cases in detention? And if so, will that review be conducted by someone outside of the current field office workforce to ensure a truly independent review?
Thanks for that question. We continue to review the cases of those individuals that are detained. I think one of the most important pieces of that sort of analysis is just making sure you only put the right people in a detention bed at the onset. And I think that's sort of had been the primary focus to start, that if you only put in the priority cases and those that pose the most significant public safety threats, then those are the individuals that are appropriate for a detention bed. We do continue to review the detained population, and we certainly have plans to do a full review of those that are in our custody and continue to review cases of those that are arrested and detained to make sure that they meet our priority. So I'll certainly commit to that.
Okay, but will that review be done from an independent? Will it be an independent review, or will that review be done within ICE itself.
So-
That's, I think, because that's an important
Yeah.
thing that you need to consider.
And we have, the current process is the initial review is done at the local field office level. There is a secondary review that's done by someone outside of the field office, as you sort of described. And we are looking at some other sort of frameworks that might work as we look at other options to review these cases, but that work is still underway.
Okay, and I may have some recommendations for you. And I see that my time is up, so now I'm going to go to Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Director Johnson, sir, we saw almost 900,000 persons cross the southwest border illegally during 2019, and we declared it a crisis. It was not possible for CBP and ICE to detain the sheer numbers of people appended at the border. I've got several questions. To begin, sir, for those migrants that entered in 2019, how many or what percentage were given a notice to appear when they were released from CBP or ICE custody, sir?
I believe, sir, that the answer to that is everyone that was arrested and apprehended by Border Patrol was issued a notice to appear. But I would want to confirm, but that's my understanding.
Yes, sir. And of those given a notice to appear, what percentage never once checked in with the court or their ICE office?
Sir, I don't have that information in front of me. What I will say is typically once those individuals report to court, that's when ICE is typically made aware. And obviously for those that we release on alternatives to detention, we have a much better way, an effective way to track those folks through the immigration life cycle. But I would have to see if we can't pull that information about those that were apprehended in 2019 and get back to you.
Thank you. After almost 2 years, what, if you know, sir, what is the current compliance rate for those migrants who arrived in 2019?
We certainly don't have that information. What I can tell you is based on the number of individuals that we enrolled in alternatives to detention. In FY20, we had about 11,000 individuals abscond from the program. And so far in FY21, we've had about 3,000 or 2,700 people. This is through March, abscond from the ATD program.
Thank you, sir. For those who are not compliant with the terms of their release or who have orders of removal, what is ICE doing to find those individuals and remove them from the U.S.? And as a follow-up, is there room under President Biden's priorities to ensure that those people who are not in compliance are expelled, sir?
There certainly is room, as I mentioned in my opening remarks. Everyone that's here in the country illegally is subject to arrest and removal. So there's certainly some room there. In terms of what ICE is doing to sort of identify those that aren't compliant or that failed to comply with their court order, I mean, that's, it really comes down to a resource issue. As you know, we have 6,000 ERO officers that have to cover, 5,000 state, local, and county jails. And there's a lot of individuals on the non-detained docket. So they're only able to do but so much given the staffing levels. But they do make efforts to identify those that violate their terms of release.
Yes, sir. One final question in this round. Are you able to quantify how many individuals are currently being admitted at each point of entry without receiving a notice to appear? If so, how are these individuals vetted, and what conditions of release are being set for these individuals, sir?
Sir, I would have to defer that question to Border Patrol, they're the ones responsible for issuing the NTA. I do not have a whole lot of visibility on the actual numbers that are being released without issuance of an NTA.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your answering those questions. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Director Johnson, I appreciate your almost 30 years of experience and career, and I thank you for your service, for everything you've done. I want to ask a couple questions, one dealing with staffing and then one dealing with the prosecutorial discretions. So let me ask you about staffing. I'm talking about the Homeland Security investigations. We know what they do. I think bipartisan, we agree that we need to do that. But one of the things that I'm seeing on the border is that when you look at those HSI special agents, they spend about 88%, about 8%, maybe 9% of their time conducting long, complex investigations related to narcotics, and only about 5% of their time doing the long-term complex investigations relating to human smuggling, which is what we're seeing at the border. I mean, it's, you know, some people don't see the smuggling or the trafficking. They only see what happens when they cross the border, but on the other side is the smuggling, plus some of that happens on our U.S. side. I want to see if the committee agrees that we need to have more Homeland Security investigation agents, but we need to have more IRS folks also. And by IRS, I'm talking about, of course, the investigation research specialists that right now, you know, the ratio is just not high enough for your agents. So tell me about that, and tell me if you can also add more people to the border, because sometimes we tend to send them to nice places, other cities, but they need to be at the border, and we need to fill the staffing. For example, in the Laredo area, 1/3 of the we still have about 1/3 of vacancy in the Laredo area, and you can look at the border area, other areas. So tell us about that, and then tell us also about immigration attorneys, so the judges can do their job, the immigration judges. I know that Chairman Quigley's on. We're working with them to get more court spaces, because right now we have more judges than court spaces. So the judges are just basically hang around for an open space. And I know Chairman Quigley's helping us with that, but we also need those ICE attorneys.
Thank you, Congressman. I think you're absolutely right. You know, our HSI investigators have a fairly broad sort of portfolio as it relates to the types of crimes that they investigate, and just given, you know, their limited resources, they're typically only able to devote some percentage of their staff to the various different portfolios. So certainly recognize the concern with only 5% of the staff being devoted to human smuggling. I can't say for sure that that's 100% accurate. I've not seen that stat, but we'll confirm that. But just to your point, I mean, I think it really does just start with additional resources, at least from the smuggling context. You know, it's just not important to have the resources here and domestically, but we need to really have the sufficient resources abroad, which is where a lot of these investigations start, with our sort of partnership and work that we have with the foreign partners overseas. So, you know, in terms of the intel research specialist, which is also known as criminal analysts, you're absolutely right. We have a ratio of about 1 to 10. You know, there's 7,200 special agents and only about 750 criminal analysts. And we really do need to get that number up pretty significantly, because our data seems to suggest that, you know, that anytime you have a criminal analyst partnered with a special agent throughout the course of that investigation, that you have a 30% higher success rate in terms of a positive outcome in that investigation. So that's something that we continue to ask for the committee's support on. And we think that'll go a long way towards tackling this human trafficking and human smuggling issue that we have here in our country. As it relates to immigration attorneys, we only have 1,300 immigration attorneys today. That's compared to about 650 or so immigration judges, if I remember correctly. And, you know, that's just totally woefully inadequate in terms of our attorneys being able to cover down on all the courtrooms across the country.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Blasio.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Fleischman, and thank you, Mr. Johnson, for your remarks. As ICE's senior law enforcement official, you have an extraordinarily difficult job. Please know that there are many of us who support your mission and believe in the integrity of you and those under your supervision. I also would like to extend my thanks and gratitude to the men and women of your agency who work every day and night to protect our citizens and to enforce our laws, because this is a nation of laws. In your opening statement, you mentioned that what is happening at our border is a humanitarian crisis, and I cannot agree with you more. Since January, we have seen an unprecedented number of individuals, families, and abandoned children come to our border. This invasion of migrants is overwhelming our border facilities, and because of the global pandemic, this furthered a health risk for our Border Patrol and ICE agents. Today, I hope this committee can have an open and honest discussion on ways to address and fix this ongoing crisis. As I mentioned, since the beginning of the Biden administration, our southern border has seen an invasion of migrants trying to come into our country illegally. In March, Border Patrol told this committee that a large percentage of migrants crossing the border evaded law enforcement and entered the country. Border Patrol remains overwhelmed by the vast number of migrants they are detaining. We have heard their facilities quickly filled up, further making it a problem for agents to process illegal migrants. All that said, in April, I read a report that ICE experienced a record low of deportations. So can you please explain why we are seeing lower deportation rates when the last few months we saw an increase in border crossings? And how do we push the southern border further south, stopping dangerous individuals before they get to U.S. ports of entry?
Thank you, Congressman. I mean, I guess my first response would be, like you mentioned, there has been a significant surge of individuals along the southwest border. But, you know, the overwhelming majority of those individuals have been single adults that we have been fortunately able to expel via Title 42. So those individuals have not made it into our detention network and therefore just weren't even, you know, in a position to remove. You know, the numbers of removals, as you mentioned in April, was much lower than, or lower, I wouldn't say much lower than any, you know, than the past. And there's a lot of factors that come into to play with that. I mean, you know, that ICE doesn't control the speed at which some of these cases make it through the process in terms of getting their cases adjudicated by judges. So that could have played a factor. And as we mentioned, the arrests are down and sort of generally, although the priority arrests are up. So we think that may have also contributed to the lower number of removals.
Yeah, and my second part of the question was, can you mentioned before, it's like, how can we move like away from our southern border and move that border further south?
Yep, that's a great question. Again, that just starts with just deploying more HSI staff abroad so that they can, you know, work with our foreign partners to bring down these transnational criminal organizations right there before they reach our southern border. So that's a huge sort of a priority for us, and any additional resources we can get on that front to deploy additional staff overseas and enhance our transnational criminal investigations unit would go a long way at attacking these smugglers and human traffickers.
It seems that many elected officials in the United States believe they are above the law by creating sanctuary cities, counties, and states. Currently, there are 11 states and 180 cities and counties that are listed as sanctuary cities. These sanctuary cities pride themselves on making it difficult for DHS agencies to do their jobs and create jurisdictions of amnesty for illegal aliens. No Mississippi cities currently act as sanctuary cities. In fact, 2017, the Mississippi State Legislature passed a law making sanctuary cities illegal in the state. The law prohibits towns, counties, and universities from purposefully defying federal immigration laws. A former Mississippi governor said it best: taxpayers expect their state and its political subdivisions to abide by federal immigration laws. Can you tell me briefly, how do sanctuary cities affect your agent's ability to do their jobs? And do sanctuary cities create extra costs for your agency to enforce immigration law?
Thanks, Congressman. I mean, to start, I would say that our relationships with the state and local community is absolutely vital in us being able to carry out our important mission. Without their support, it's very difficult for us to be efficient and effective. So when local jurisdictions do not cooperate, whether that's in terms of not honoring our detainers or not letting us in at their facilities, then it puts ICE in a situation where we actually have to go out into the communities to find individuals that in this case would meet our priority. So it's certainly not the most efficient process, and it does put our officers in harm's way unnecessarily, in my view.
I see my time has expired. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Price.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Johnson, thank you for appearing before us today. Thank you for your long service. We realize there are certain limitations on what you can say about next year's budget. On the other hand, you have long experience with the department, which I hope will enable you to reflect on two interrelated challenges that I want to introduce. One is the targeting of enforcement actions, how the department exercises its prosecutorial discretion, and the interrelated problem of the relations with local law enforcement. This subcommittee has a history, goes back about 14 years, of pushing for a more precise focus on dangerous individuals when it comes to ICE enforcement. We directed funding in that way, and we assumed that in many, maybe most cases, deportation would occur as individuals emerged from the penal system. That led to the Secure Communities program. As you know, it turned out to be far less targeted, I would say, on dangerous individuals than we had hoped. A good deal of discussion and agitation during the Obama administration, and the Priority Enforcement Program replaced Secure Communities. But then Secure Communities was brought back with a vengeance by the Trump administration, with a much less effective targeting strategy on people who posed a threat. The Trump administration also sought to weaponize the 287G program. They sought to commandeer local law enforcement. It greatly increased 30 to 150 participating jurisdictions during the Trump administration. The Atlanta ICE director confirmed at one point that North Carolina raids were targeted at jurisdictions where sheriffs had withdrawn from the 287G program. Some provocative billboards were purchased by ICE across the country in areas where 287G was an issue. I mean, you know that history as well. So I want to register the hope and the belief that in the new administration, we're going to see some serious changes. We're going to see a renewed focus on targeted enforcement, and we're going to see the reform, if not the elimination, of 287G. I would appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Congressman. First, just in terms of targeted enforcement actions, I think you're absolutely spot on. As I mentioned earlier, although our overall arrests are down, I think the data shows that the individuals with the highest level of criminality is up, is somewhat reflective on the results that you get when people are somewhat hyper-focused on certain types of criminal elements. And we expect that trend to continue. And while our overall arrest numbers might not ever be as high as they were, I do expect the number of violent offenders to increase, because folks are spending their time working on those types of cases, which oftentimes are a little bit more difficult, as we all know. So as it relates to just the partnerships with 287G and other local officials, I mean, as I mentioned, I think there's some there's some importance to keeping those relationships together. I think we cannot perform our jobs without the assistance of state and locals. And while we recognize that some local government agencies have elected to end their programs, there are other local governments that find the 287G program useful. So, from our perspective, we're going to try to find some common ground and ways to encourage greater cooperation from state and locals and whatever that looks like. I mean, it doesn't have to be signing up for a 287G program, but we just want to keep those lines of communication open and find some areas of agreement, because we think there's lots of middle ground out there, and we just need to figure out what it is so that we can be effective at performing our mission.
I'm sure you'd acknowledge that if local law enforcement is seen, though, in the first instance as the long arm of ICE, that does have implications often for their ability to do their job in the local community.
Absolutely, sir, and I totally understand why people take the position that it's just not worth it. I mean, it stymies people from reporting crimes. Oftentimes people who are subject to domestic violence won't pick up the phone because they're afraid of the ICE or immigration implications. So these are all valid and fair points, and I could certainly understand why those who choose not to participate make that decision.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair.
Ms. Henson.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you holding this hearing today. I did have the ability to speak with Acting Director Johnson earlier this week. So thank you again for taking the time to meet with me earlier this week. My time today I'm going to devote to follow-up questions from that conversation, as well as a few concerning issues that have been brought to my attention, specifically about ICE's activity or lack thereof in certain cases as well. These issues and a general lack of information are highly concerning to me, and we're going to follow up with the Secretary when he's in a few weeks, but these issues must be addressed by ICE leadership and the administration. In my mind, it's part of our role to hold everybody accountable and make sure taxpayer dollars are spent effectively. So Director Johnson, thank you again for your service and our frank conversation earlier this week. I also think it's important to note, when members of this committee reach out to ask for answers, we're doing that not to create more work for you, but because we are ultimately accountable to the American taxpayer and require those answers to be able to make truly informed decisions about how to spend those taxpayer dollars, their money. So thank you for the responses I have already received, and I trust that you and your team are going to follow up on the other questions that we discussed in our call. We did talk about in our call the disconnect between ICE and Customs and Border Patrol, specifically when it comes to tracking illegal immigrants once they have been released into the United States. So today, can you confirm for me the inability for ICE to track illegal immigrants' location and then their activity within the homeland on that person level following their release by CBP?
Sure. Thanks, Congresswoman. As I mentioned in our call, there's certainly some gaps in our ability to track everyone that's released in the interior. For those individuals that are released on alternatives to detention, whether it's an ankle monitor or smart link or telephonic reporting, we have much better success at keeping track of those. But for individuals that are just released with notification to report to ICE or to show up in court, then our ability to track those folks closely is much more limited.
Yeah, so this gap you talk about, why is it so much more challenging to track individuals now than it was in 2019?
No, I don't think it was much more limited to track in 2019. The systems have been the same systems are in place. And in 2019, when we were seeing a surge of family units that were being released, I mean, they were being released with a notice to appear and not, we couldn't enroll everyone on ATD because the numbers were high, just as they are now. So we were certainly running into those same issues in 2019 as we are today. That's not changed.
Can you state for the record that you're not currently able to tell Iowans how many illegal immigrants are present in Iowa right now, or how many CBP has released into the country with plans to be in Iowa?
That is correct. I mean, and again, I would want to just, that's my understanding. I'd like to start with, I would like to go back to CBP and just clarify that they are unable to pull data by state, but that is my understanding that their system of record will not sort of produce a report based on the states that the individuals that they're releasing are proposing to reside.
Right, and you say you want to go back to them, obviously, to confirm this, but do you believe that ICE should be able to provide this information? Obviously, we've got a gap here in communication if you can't and they can't. But do you believe Americans should know if illegal immigrants are in their neighborhoods? Specifically, you talk about some of these risk categories. I think people deserve to know who's coming in.
I agree, and we, it should be possible for that information to be transferred over to ICE's system of record in a way that would allow us to track folks down to the state and quite frankly the cities that these individuals are living in. We just don't have that capability or capacity currently.
Okay, so why is that? I mean, is it lack of resources that you're not able to track individuals down to that in-person level at this point?
It's the two systems, the one system that CBP uses and the one that ICE uses, they just don't talk to each other in a meaningful way. So I do think it's, getting some technology that'll make the two systems talk would be extremely, helpful, or, maybe we will have to just scrap the two systems that are being used and start afresh with something that provides the sophistication that we need to track folks.
Well, Director Johnson, I appreciate those answers, and I'll probably have a few more questions around you, but thank you. And Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to dialogue here with the acting director, and thanks for our conversation earlier in the week, acting director. I wanted to bring up an issue that had some local impacts as well. And let me start by saying in fiscal year 2021, this committee included report language that directs ICE to publish on a publicly accessible website reports on arrest, detention, and removal of U.S. citizens that were citizens when they were detained or found to be citizens while in ICE custody. Can you tell me the status of the reports that's being prepared, and what can the committee expect to see? When can the committee expect to see this information online?
So Mr. Congressman, I do not know have the background on the actual U.S. citizen report. I do remember clearing something related to U.S. citizens in ICE custody over the last week. And it's my understanding that that's going to be sort of signed off on and submitted to the committee soon. I just don't know if that's the same report that's going to be posted on that we're required to post on the web. So can I take that as a get back and follow up with your staff?
Absolutely, and would just encourage you with an eye toward following the guidance of the report language to include this in a publicly available format as well. Happy to view the information, obviously, in the committee role. But I think that this deserves to be publicly available as well, that ICE is the number of individuals and the manner in which ICE detains U.S. citizens, as some of my constituents have experienced. Acting Director, I wanted to talk specifically about Adelanto facility in Southern California. There have been ongoing concerns with the facility, and sometime around October of last year, ICE began operating a new annex to increase their bed capacity near Adelanto, right next door. Can you tell me what the capacity of that facility is? And if you can't, is that something that you can get back to us on?
Yes, I mean, the capacity at Adelanto, if I remember correctly, is somewhere around 2,000 or thereabout, if I remember correctly, but I'll confirm. And the annex is definitely much smaller. I think it's somewhere around 600 beds total, maybe 800 at the annex, but I will get you those exact figures and you know, following this meeting. I will say that our use of the annex right now has been limited largely to just the new intake and testing and quarantine of positive cases. And we have not seen, you know, any sort of significant population there. Once those folks clear their quarantine, they are transferred over to Adelanto.
So can you tell me then how many beds we pay for that aren't being utilized?
At both facilities, Adelanto and Desert View?
Sure, and I bring this up in the context of there was a state bill that sought to limit for-profit prisons, and I know ICE entered into contracts with these facilities and with others around the country that just prior to this bill taking effect, and so just wanted to kind of get for the record, what contracts do we have? If you said 2,000 at one facility, 600 to 800 at the annex, what's the population there, and are we under contract, and are we paying for bed space that we are not utilizing?
Copy that. We'll certainly run down that information. I believe of the 3 or 4 facilities that we entered into sort of contracts with right there in the sort of midst of the new California legislation, I think that one facility near Adelanto is the only one that we actually activated. But I'll confirm with that to you, Congressman Aguilar, and let you know.
But you agree that we are paying for bed space that we aren't utilizing?
Oh, for sure, right? Especially right now during this pandemic. I mean, that's the case that across the country in a number of our facilities that we have these guaranteed minimums, and it's just because there's been so much uncertainty surrounding whether Title 42 is going to end, or a host of litigation that's at play that could have significantly turned things around, and we would have needed all of these beds. But that is absolutely accurate that there are some beds being paid for.
Yeah, I think that's just something critically that we need to look at as we keep an eye on the FY22 budget. It's pretty clear that there's a lot of bed space that we're utilizing in many cases, or that we're underutilizing, and we're paying companies for that. And I think that that's something we have to remedy and fix. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Johnson, great to see you. And please thank all your men and women for the job that they do. As a former law enforcement officer, I'm particularly appreciative of the work that you and your office accomplish. If you would, Director, I want to talk a little bit about 287G, because I'm hearing some rumors that this program may actually be in danger of being cut back or eliminated. And I really want this committee to hear how important this program is. I know as a sheriff, this is one of the few programs that was a win-win-win. It's a win for the community because it keeps our community safer by getting rid of criminals. It keeps our officers safer by ICE officers come to the jail and pick these guys up for deportation, and they don't have to find them on the street. And it's safer for them because they are found in those locations. And I'd like you, if you would, Director, because I know as these numbers continue to go up on the interior of the country, a program like 287G, and let me make this clear, I'm only talking about the jail-based program, because the task force program that happens out on the street where you're actually going and looking for individuals, I never had that. I never did that because I felt it drove people underground and I did not want to do that. But my jail had a very robust 287G program. And these are individuals who are in the interior of our country committing crimes, getting arrested, and that's a prerequisite for 287G. They have to go to jail under the GYM program. They go to jail and then they work on being deported. Can you talk about how important that program is to the safety of your officers and our communities?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mr. Congressman. As you mentioned, I mean, this is a perfect example of good cooperation between federal and state law enforcement. We, as I mentioned earlier, these relationships that we have are vital to ICE being able to sort of successfully perform its mission. The 287G program has the two types, the task force model, which your Jacksonville did not necessarily have, and then you have the jail enforcement model, which you did have, which is basically sharing that information as you run in print with ICE and letting us know if there's a ICE want and an ICE warrant. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of jurisdictions that find the program useful. And others who have decided for whatever reason that it's not as useful. It runs contrary to some of the other law enforcement obligations, which I understand. I've heard concerns from folks about them not wanting to report crime, but I do think that anytime we can have our officers not have to go out into the communities and arrest people that are in local custody, whether it's a 287G program or it's whether the facility is honoring a detainer, it makes our officers safe.
So Director, I mean, look, you ran the EOR program for a long time. So can you talk about how there's been growth in the 287G program that's made it better for your officers, safer for your officers?
So I don't have the exact numbers. I mean, I do know that there's at least over 100 current agreements. Some of the agreements are fairly useful, and then there's obviously some agreements that there's just not a whole lot of activity. So look, anytime our guys and gals don't have to go out and arrest someone in the communities and put themselves at risk, it's a good thing for folks. But I certainly recognize the sort of the issues associated with some that think that it just results in certain folks being apprehended and potentially targeted, which is certainly something I don't think any of us want to see.
Thank you very much. And I see my time has run out, Madam Chair, but I certainly hope, Director, this is a program that survives any cuts from the Biden administration. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director, for being here. Sir, I was one of the founding members of the Transgender Equality Caucus, so I think justifiably concerned about their care under ICE detention. As of February 2019, ICE confirmed it was jailing more than 100 transgender individuals in 20 different immigration jails across the U.S. Unfortunately, immigration detention is notoriously dangerous and harmful for transgender immigrants who are likely to be seeking asylum because of transphobic violence they've already faced or they fear, and because of such histories, they're likely to suffer from depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other mental health conditions. Additionally, in 2017, a congressional inquiry revealed that LGBTQ people in ICE custody are 97 times more likely to be sexually victimized than non-LGBT people in detention. So do you know how many people are currently in ICE custody who identify as transgender and which facilities they're detained in?
Sir, I do not have that information in front of me, but it's certainly something I can run down.
Okay. Now, our advocates report that many transgender individuals in ICE, they don't reveal their identity because they fear they will be subject to segregation and other harms. Can you tell us a little bit about the training and protocols in place to ensure that individuals coming into custody are provided a safe and protected opportunity to reveal their gender and their orientation to ICE?
Absolutely. Upon intake, individuals are asked a series of questions, and one of the questions is, how they identify. So there are a number of opportunities along the way for individuals to sort of reveal their LGBT or QI status to an officer at any point in the process. There's also the detention reporting and information line where if they don't feel comfortable reporting it to the officer, they can report it to our hotline, or they can report it during their medical screening when they're in front of medical professionals and not officers. We have made some efforts on sort of improving our training and identifying specific facilities that would focus on housing these individuals in a less restrictive environment. But there's always more work we can do. I mean, we're looking at all aspects of our vulnerable population to include transgender, and this is going to continue to be a priority for us as we move forward in assessing our detention framework.
And obviously, there have been horrors told about transgender individuals being abused in these facilities. So it just seems obvious that the training needs to be pretty dramatically expanded and altered to make sure that the culture understands that these abuses are not going to be tolerated, and that if anything, extra protection needs to be afforded those who identify to all of yours. Are there plans to expand what you're talking about even more?
Yes, definitely some work is underway to figure out, as I mentioned, how to deal with various segments of our vulnerable population, to include transgender, identifying other alternatives where that is possible. As you may be aware, I mean, some individuals that are transgender has pretty serious criminal convictions. And it's, that's one area where we're just trying to evaluate some of the mitigating factors that come with some of these cases, like their special vulnerabilities, compared to the public safety threat that they actually pose. But we're going to continue to sort of dig into that issue and see where we can make improvements.
Yeah, if you could get back to us on that, as well as my initial question about the number of transgender individuals and where they are located, and any plans and how those plans are moving forward for additional and improved training and care. I appreciate it. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding today's hearing. Mr. Johnson, as you know, vaccinating your detainees against COVID-19 is important not only for their own health, but also for the health of the communities where the detention facilities are located. I have a county jail in my district that contracts with ICE. And despite some initial confusion, I'm pleased to report that everybody detained there was offered COVID-19 vaccines on March 10th. However, over the last few months, there have been broader communication breakdowns around ICE detainee vaccinations that need to be addressed. You stated in your testimony that COVID-19 vaccines for people in ICE's custody were included in the federal government's allocation for each state, and that the local and state public health departments are responsible for distributing them to the detainees. However, I understand that DHS is currently reevaluating its strategy for vaccinating people in custody. Can you please clarify for the committee what the current plan is for getting ICE's detainees vaccinated?
Thank you, Congresswoman. As things currently stand today, the allotment for vaccines for detainees across the entire country is part of the individual states' allotment.
That's what, right, exactly.
That is the current sort of plan. And as you're probably aware, what priority level the inmates and ICE detainees are varies significantly by state. I mean, we have some states in the Ninth Circuit, for instance, California, Arizona, where people have already started to get their vaccines actually a few months ago, whereas in other states, they're much lower on a priority list. So because of that sort of variance, we have been looking at working with CDC and HHS to just see if we can get our own batch of vaccines so we can just deploy them across the country to the ICE detainee population. The problem with that is if you have 10 ICE detainees, like in your situation where the number of ICE detainees in your facility compared to the number of local inmates is it could be much low. So for 10 ICE, if we bring vaccines for 10 ICE detainees and there's 500 local inmates that don't get vaccinated, then that could create some problems. So that's one of the issues that we're going to have to work through if we deliver just the vaccine to the ICE population that's detained in these local facilities with U.S. citizen inmates.
So if ICE is dependent on state and local jurisdictions for vaccine allocations, what outreach have you done to convey that need to local partners?
Oh, the locals are aware. I mean, that was communicated in the original plan on how to deal with not just the ICE detainee population, but the U.S. Marshal Service population and many of the populations across the country, that it was going to be consistent with the individual states to vaccinate their inmate populations.
So what plans then do you have to ensure that all detainees at all facilities have access to any translation services that they may need to learn about the vaccination in a language that they understand, right? Like, we're trying to make sure that everybody can get vaccinated, and we don't want there to be barriers in place.
So we do have a fairly robust and comprehensive interpreter and translation services line. I also think we've already created some material that explains not only the importance of vaccinations, but some of the other educational materials surrounding COVID generally. So that is certainly a priority for us. But if there are, all of our facilities have access to our interpreters hotline. And if there's any issues with communication and communicating the importance of the vaccine, then we'll certainly make sure we focus on that. But it's a fair point, and we'll make sure we get something out to folks to remind them.
Great. And you stated in your testimony that ICE Health Service Corps will administer vaccines at facilities that they staff. However, the Health Service Corps staffs only 20 of the over 200 facilities that house ICE detainees. So who administers the vaccines at the other 90%? So that's different than the allocation.
The person who administers it is the health authority that oversees that particular clinic. So and I don't know if you're at or near McHenry, but
yes, I represent the McHenry ICE facility or the McHenry County Jail. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So it's the health service administrator and that medical authority that would be responsible for not only just administering the test to the ICE inmates, but the ICE detainees, but also the McHenry County inmates as well.
Okay. Well, vaccination is so important. It's not just a moral obligation, but it's important to protect the public health of all Americans. I'm looking forward to coming back in round 2. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Okay. Thank you. And that completes round 1, and we do have time for a second round. Director Johnson, I want to go back to an issue that was raised by Congressman Aguilar. Beginning in fiscal year 2019 and then continuing over the course of the fiscal year 2020, ICE entered into contracts to increase its guaranteed minimum detention bed capacity by over 10,000 beds without providing notification to Congress about how this would impact future appropriation requirements. While ICE has the responsibility to humanely enforce the laws of our country, we have a responsibility to oversee the agency's budget. Not disclosing this information obstructed our ability to do so, resulting in likely hundreds of millions of dollars going to pay for detention beds that have not been used during the pandemic, and while Title 42 public health order has dramatically reduced the need for detention beds for recent border crossers. My question is, why didn't ICE engage with Congress and how the plan to expand guaranteed minimum detention capacity would tie this committee's hands when making funding questions?
Thanks, Chairwoman. I do believe, I'm fairly certain that ICE was in communication with the committee during 2019 when we were sort of bringing on all the 20,000 additional detention beds, and we were providing ramp up plans and explaining to folks our plan to relieve the overcrowding that we were faced with along the southwest border. So there was certainly some visibility into all the beds and efforts and work that was underway to try to get those individuals out of the overcrowded Border Patrol stations. Now, maybe there was no specific discussion on how those contracts were going to be structured, and that some of them were going to have to include some guaranteed minimums.
Yeah, I just want to make the point that you're right on that. The discussions that you're talking about were not about contracting, and the impression that was given that these were temporary. And now, we are in this situation where it's impacting our budget. So in light of the reduction in detention bed requirements related to Title 42, another part of the question that I had is, why didn't ICE at the very least delay expanding its guaranteed minimum capacity until after the public health order could be lifted?
So I think in large part, we brought on all those beds well before March 2020. And as you may know, Chairwoman, we've been at risk of losing Title 42, it seems like at every month or every few weeks. So there was just so much uncertainty surrounding, how long we would be able to keep expelling people, as well as there were other things that reduced the population prior to the new administration coming in, like MPP and some of the other stuff that was also the subject of, significant litigation. So I think that the only answer is that there was just so much uncertainty surrounding our detainee population, whereas, just overnight, we could start seeing 3,000 and 5,000 people a day again, and those beds could fill up, that there was, just a lot of reticence to ending all of those contracts and agreements, and then finding ourselves back in a situation like we were in 2019, where Border Patrol had, 15,000 people in custody and no place for them to go.
I think what you're describing is a situation which highlights why it was important to actually work with the subcommittee and to plan this out in a way that we wouldn't be in the situation now where it's impacting our budget. But let me, one more question on that. What financial analysis was conducted to determine that ICE could absorb the costs associated with the substantial growth in its guaranteed minimum capacity?
So there was certainly some analysis by our budget folks. I mean, if I remember correctly, I mean, I think that even for FY21, even though, we've gotten rid of some of the facilities with GMs, there's still a good number that exist. But I think for 21, we were able to absorb the additional costs associated with some of those guaranteed minimum contracts, just based on our current burn rate and the fact that we're not using a lot of other beds outside of those GM facilities. But no, I totally get your point. I mean, and we'll do a much better job in the future of making sure folks are aware of the various structures of any contracts that are being brought on that might impact funding in out years.
Okay. Well, does ICE have internal controls in place to ensure that it doesn't commit taxpayers to expenditures for which Congress does not provide funding?
We do. There are some various controls in place that ensure that we don't go above what was allotted by Congress.
Okay, so somehow there appears then to be a breakdown, and because we're in this situation right now. I know my time is up, but I do want to emphasize what Congressman Aguilar asked for, and that is the amount of funding that ICE has spent on empty beds in 2020 and so far this year. If you could provide that with us, I'd appreciate it. Mr. Fleischman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Johnson, the country is still operating under a Title 42 public health declaration because of the COVID pandemic, which allows ICE and CBP to repatriate and remove migrants who have crossed the border illegally immediately after their apprehension, thus keeping the numbers of migrants who are released into the U.S. after crossing illegally down. But we get the sense that there are talks of revoking the Title 42 declaration, which means the ability to swiftly repatriate and return migrants also goes away. I have several questions. What are the plans to lift the Title 42 declaration, sir?
So there's certainly a concern that we may lose our Title 42 authority. I think it's all stemming from a number of lawsuits that are out there. I am not aware that it would be lifted sort of voluntarily. Because again, with the large number of single adults that are being expelled, we think that in this COVID environment that is extremely helpful. So I don't think it's a situation where it's going to just be lifted electively. We will be mandated through some sort of court order to lift it.
What would that mean for ICE operations, sir, and the population ICE is responsible for tracking through the court process?
Well, the biggest impact is just going to be the single adults that are coming across the southern border that are largely being expelled via Title 42. The last report I received was somewhere around 3,000 single adults per day. The impact of 3,000 people a day coming into ICE custody in the midst of a pandemic could be, could significantly impact our operation. On the family unit front, we are only expelling about 25% of the family units right now. So that'll be a little bit of an impact, but nothing as significant as the impact as it would be for single adults.
For planning purposes, sir, how many people are you estimating will flood the border and into ICE's detention or responsibility, sir?
Very little visibility on what the impact might be in terms of additional people coming. What I can say, sir, is that we're expelling somewhere around 3,000 to 3,500 single adults a day. So those would certainly be people that would be coming into our immigration system if T42 were to go away.
Yes, sir. What plans does ICE have to meet the increased numbers, and can you meet the demand for services and detention within your current budget, sir?
In FY21, perhaps. I mean, I would want to go back and confirm just because our numbers have been so low. We may be able to absorb an increase for the next, 4-5 months of this fiscal year. But, at 3,000 a day, it could very well exceed our funding, as well as just our ability and capacity within our detention network. But I don't have anything other than that, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Director. And Madam Chair, I'm going to yield back. I think Mr. Palazzo is going to take the chair as ranking member. I've got a couple of questions to ask in Labor H. So, Mr. Director, I thank you. And Madam Chair, I will be back momentarily.
Okay, Mr. Cuellar.
Madam Chair, Director, follow up on Title 42. I hope Title 42 doesn't go away. My understanding is that you get about 3,000 single adults per day. About 90 to 95% of those single adults are expelled back under this 1944 law. If you look at the Del Rio area, you get Cubans, Haitians, and Venezuelans mainly. Then you go to the Laredo area, you get mainly Mexicans that are coming in, single adults. And then you go to the Valley, that's where you get 15% are kids, 37% are family units. But in the Laredo area, if you would release all those adults into our community, I would tell you my community would not be happy. And I know you got to follow whatever the administration says, but just I can tell you my community would not want to have where most of the people coming to the Laredo area are single adults, and to be released in our area, my community would not be happy with that. But that is, I'll ask you to comment on Title 42. But the other thing is talk about prosecutorial discretion. In the Valley, they have released 20,400 people on what I call the honor system. I know some of the folks in administration have called this a notice to appear, but my understanding, a notice to appear is a I-862, I-82. The people that are being released are under a I-385, which is an admissions and release document. So under the 385 document, the remarks there is that they are supposed to go to a local ICE office at their final destination and report to you. My understanding is for you to do that, you have to do that manually. So you have to check manually 20,400 cases. And I think you need some sort of computer where you be able to connect with CBP, because I don't think you all are able to talk under those circumstances to check those 20,400 people that have been released on the honor system. And by the way, it's not only family units. I have, single adults that have been released. Tell us a little bit about the points that I just mentioned.
Thanks, Congressman. To your first point, I mean, Title 42 is absolutely critical. Without it, we would have so many negative outcomes in our detention facilities, and I suspect that most of the intake would have been shut down based on significant numbers of quarantines and extremely high positivity rates at certain facilities. So the only way we've been able to survive and have so few COVID-related deaths in custody over the last 15 months has been because of Title 42. In terms of the 20,400 folks that are being released, you're absolutely correct. There is no automated method by which we can track those individuals. There is a requirement for them to show up at their closest ICE office and report. Once they report to an ICE office, they are put into our system of record, and at that point, we can track those folks at that time. But otherwise, we would just have to get a list from Border Patrol of the 20,000 cases and check them pretty regularly.
So, Mr. Director, so when they're released, they're not put in the system itself, and it's not a notice to appear before an immigration court. So in order for you to put them in the system, Mr. Director, you have to wait for them to show up, if they show up, so you can put them in the system, correct?
That's when they get put into the ICE system of record. They're certainly in the Border Patrol system because they made the encounter and they processed the individual. But they typically don't get into the ICE system until they actually report. That's with the exception of those individuals that are being enrolled into ATD. Now, if you are enrolled in ATD, then obviously we have greater ability to track those folks because we are taking their information, putting it in our system at the time that we're putting a GPS monitor or putting them in smartly.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Real quickly, because my time's up, have there been any talks about creating additional immigration court dockets to deal with this surge? I know this is it's under the Department of Justice, but any talks on that? Just a yes or no. Sorry.
Yes, there are talks that are underway to create a much more accelerated process so that these folks could get adjudicated much more quickly than they do currently.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Mr. Palazzo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This committee has already begun working on crafting the fiscal year 22 budget legislation. And I know the acting director, you're limited as to what you can share before the president releases his budget in detail. But generally, what resources does ICE need? And with the flood of migrants coming into our country, I hope there's a better way to monitor these individuals before they find some way to disappear. So what resources does ICE need, and how can this committee help you and your agents do their jobs most effectively?
Thanks, Congressman. I mean, I would start with just the help we need on the data modernization effort. I mean, that's an area where we continue to struggle with our data analytics and reporting. It's certainly, I'm sure, been a frustration for some of the committee members. So just funding along those efforts. Additional attorneys is certainly, as I mentioned before, we have 1,300 attorneys. There's over 600 judges. We need attorneys to represent and adjudicate these cases in courtrooms across the country. The other thing is the ERO case officers. We have, nearly 3 million people on the non-detained docket, and if there's a real expectation that these cases are actually monitored and we can sort of track them and know when folks are showing up for court, then we need sufficient ERO case officers to track them. And then lastly, on the HSI side, we need more special agents. We need our criminal analysts at a more reflective, appropriate ratio so that they can provide the case support that these criminal investigations need. And we need to beef up our international footprint so that we can dismantle and tackle these TCOs right there before they make it to our border.
with the constant media narrative and just conversations, or you hear people wanting to abolish ICE. There's this defund police movement, which is just makes no sense in the world. Can you tell me, is this affecting your team's morale in any way or fashion? And how is recruitment and how is retention? Because it has to be extremely tough when we're trying to ask you to do your jobs, enforce our nation's laws, and at the same time it feels like we're handcuffing you from being able to do those jobs. Just like the Border Patrol, instead of enforcing our laws on the border, I mean, they're picking up trash, changing diapers. They're basically become babysitters, and that's not what they signed on for. And I know your agents, I mean, y'all do great work. You're tasked with a monumental mission as part of our overarching Homeland Security mission. So can you just talk to the morale, the recruitment, the retention, and what can we do as a committee to, I mean, obviously, words hurt, and when we, say things, it could have an impact on your agency and other federal agencies as well. So if you don't mind just sharing your thoughts on that.
Sure. Again, it's certainly challenging when, and I'm sure that some of the men and women are impacted when you hear statements like that. But look, we realize that it was, we're going to get criticized for carrying out our job, no matter what job it is. I mean, ICE is the only agency where 50% of the people are going to be mad at us 100% of the time, and our men and women are professionals. They'll carry out the mission and perform it with with great professionalism and pride. In terms of recruitment and retention, I mean, I think we have a fairly specialized workforce, where, people sign up for this job because they like the job, and they typically don't, at least in the officer corps, the special agents and the deportation officers. Obviously, there's always going to be issues with, attorneys and support folks who can certainly find a better, less hectic place to work other than ICE. So we struggle into some respects in those categories, but our law enforcement corps are here and to stay, and they typically don't go until they retire.
Well, Director Johnson, I appreciate your remarks, and thank you for your 30+ years of service, and let the men and women under your supervision know how much America appreciates their work and commitment. Thank you. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Price.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Johnson, let me pursue a little further these intertwined issues of targeting enforcement on truly dangerous people and the kind of relations you maintain with local law enforcement. Looking at figures, and you cited this more generally, looking at the people in detention and how many had serious records over the past administration. I'm quoting here from the track reports at Syracuse University. The number of people in ICE detention rose from 41,163 in 2016 to 49,396 in 2019. But at the same time, the number of those individuals who had serious level 1 criminal records declined from 7,475 in 2016 to 6,048 in 2019. Percentage of those detained with no criminal conviction at all rose from 57 to 64%. In other words, ICE raids became both more frequent and less discriminating. And I can tell you that that both that increased frequency and that lesser discrimination, that more random quality, was felt in immigrant communities throughout the country, including a lot that I saw in communities that I represent. Just a lot more anxiety and apprehension. So I wonder, do you have any kind of comparable? You said earlier in your earlier testimony that the percentage of those enforcement actions involving serious criminals had increased, and I don't know exactly the time frame you were referring to, but do you have figures you could supply that would document that?
I do, and what we've been the period that I'm referring to is after the release of our February 18 guidance, where it made clear, what the sort of priorities were, and where we wanted the officers out in the field to focus their efforts. So that's the period that we were able to compare the last 2 months or so compared to the preceding months to see what the data look like.
All right, if you could give us those precise numbers, that is, of course, the kind of direction we're looking for and hoping for with this new administration. Now, on the matter of local law enforcement, I was interested in the exchange with Mr. Rutherford earlier, who, of course, comes from a law enforcement background. As I understood it, he described a system jail-based system based on the penal system. And of course, as I said earlier, this is what some of us had in mind when we were trying to reform this earlier. Secure communities turned out to be, I would say, less focused on serious criminals, more on people who were apprehended, sometimes for traffic violations or whatever. It wasn't sufficiently discriminating. And then, of course, these other models of the 287G program, the so-called task force model, are less discriminating yet. So the question I think you and we are going to need to face is this salvageable at all, or is this 287? And then you add to that the weaponization of 287G, just the absolutely reprehensible weaponization of this program during the last 4 years. I just wonder if it's salvageable.
No, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's some that find usefulness in it, and others that don't want to touch it at all because of some of the the polarization or just the impact that it has on local community. I mean, I think the question, at least as I see it, is as long as we can all agree on or come to some agreement on what types of cases that everyone feels comfortable targeting, whether it's in this 287G sort of framework or whether it's just in honoring detainers,
right?
But just identifying what everyone is sort of in agreement with in terms of those folks should be on the table to be removed because we don't want them released into our communities, and I think if we start there. And I think there'd be some opportunities to find some middle ground and actually, potentially salvage it or come up with something, a new program that sort of addresses the issue that we're all trying to solve.
Yes, sir. That is possible, entirely possible, completely outside of a 287G framework, I would think. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Henson?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the second round, and thank you, Acting Director Johnson, as well. You mentioned that communications break down between CBP and ICE in terms of your systems, and Congressman Clare was hitting on that as well in his line of questioning a little bit earlier. Our office stands ready to work with you to come up with solutions on that, because ultimately this is a breakdown in communication that's keeping you from fulfilling your mission. It's keeping CBP from fulfilling their mission. Ultimately, a barrier to keeping our communities safe as well. So we're ready to work on that. I think a clear priority list there. I want to go to something you said about the number of arrests, the lower number of arrests. Basically, we know that's about a 50% reduction in arrests at this point due to the priority changes laid out in the guidance memo from February. And Madam Chair, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter the guidance memo from February 18th, 2021 into the record.
So granted.
Thank you. Director Johnson, were you aware that it would result in that 50% reduction based on these criteria laid out here? Do you believe the changes in this memo are impacting your ability to carry out your mission of enforcing all of our immigration laws to the fullest extent possible?
I suspected that there would be some reduction in the low level folks that we had taken into custody over the, in terms of the prior administration. So absolutely, I did think that was a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, 50% reduction is a significant reduction. Is it average, right, or is it accurate right now that ICE is averaging 1 interior arrest for every 2.5 months per officer? So that's on pace of about 4 to 5 arrests per year per officer. Does that seem accurate to you?
I don't know. I've not looked at.
Okay. Well, it's definitely a low number, and in my mind, it keeps you from fulfilling your mission. And I think that's an important flag when you do that math. If the arrests are down significantly, and we're talking about eliminating Title 42, 3,000 adults coming in a day, 21,000 a week, over 1 million a year. This is a significant challenge, obviously, coming your way, and we want to make sure we're catching the worst of the worst, obviously. But this is your mission at its core. So I think we need to get back to prioritizing your mission, and obviously this committee stands to do that. Also wanted to flag, it's my understanding that a longtime senior employee at the agency rang a warning bell about this and this process in an email to you and other senior officials as well. So based on your many years of service, and you're talking about approaching 30 years of service, you've got to have a professional, well-honed opinion about this. Do you have concerns about the impact that this might have long-term on the ability to carry out ICE's mission?
Ms. Hanson, I think we have lost the connection with the director.
Okay. Well, I will follow up with him on our questions and for the record, but appreciate the second round, Madam Chair, and I would yield back until we get that sorted out.
Okay, let me check on what the possibility is of getting him back.
Okay.
I'll be with. The report I have is that they're trying to reconnect the director. And we have a little bit of time, so Ms. Henson, I will give you the time back so you can ask that final question or make that final point if we get connected, okay?
Yep, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Director, can you hear us? I see him back on the screen, but I don't know if he can hear us or not. You may be on mute, Director. We'll just recess just for a couple of minutes while they fix his audio. Apparently it's not working.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. So, Ms. Henson?
Yeah, and thank you, Madam Chair, for that flexibility. And thank you, Acting Director. I know technological challenges can be a problem for all of us. So I just wanted to go back. I'm not sure where you heard my last question cut off, but I wanted to flag that we understood a long-term senior employee actually flagged it for you in an email and to other senior officials about this guidance being a concern. So I just wanted to know from your professional opinion, you've got about 30 years of experience in this field. Did you have concerns about the impact that this would have on the agency's ability to carry out its ultimate mission?
So what I would sort of respond, I guess, is that certainly no concerns from my perspective if the goal is just keeping our communities safe and making sure that individuals convicted of serious crimes or those that pose, the biggest public safety threats or any public safety threat, quite frankly, as well as national security threat, are still sort of prime for immigration enforcement. So certainly no concerns on that front from my perspective.
I would real quick point to the category number 3, which is public safety category, that says a non-citizen is presumed to be a public safety enforcement and removal priority if he or she poses a threat to public safety and he or she has been convicted of an aggravated felony. I think that's concerning to me when I read that, because I look at how much time that might take and they're a danger to our community and they're not meeting these 3 criteria when it's your goal or your agency's mission to get these people into custody. So I think this narrows it beyond the scope of what actually is designed to keep our public safe. So that would be my main concern with this guidance at this point. And I think our Iowans deserve to know who's in their communities, and it's your job to make sure that our communities are safe and we're protected from these folks. So Madam Chair, I understand my time is out and I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Aguilar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Acting Director, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Adelanto facility. And in November of 2020, there were inspections of the facility, specifically the ICE processing centers, east and west Adelanto. Because of the pandemic, these inspections were conducted remotely, I understand. Staff sent photos and videos of the facility to the inspectors and conducted interviews by phone. In one instance, it was noted that there was mold in the shower. However, the pictures provided to the inspectors did not show mold. Can you walk me through the logistics of how ICE complies with these inspections, and how can we be confident that you're getting a true picture of the facilities and that inspectors have an honest view of what's going on?
No, again, this is all unprecedented territory. I mean, we've never been having to operate in the midst of a global pandemic. There was a lot of changes that we had to sort of implement as it relates to our facilities, and whether it's suspending visitation, really limiting the number of individuals that were actually showing up at the facility, because everyone that goes there is a potential threat at spreading the virus. So while it was certainly not ideal to go to a sort of virtual format for doing these inspections, and quite frankly, not something that in many of the inspectional components had sort of even developed a plan for, but we felt like we still needed to have some sort of oversight at these facilities during the pandemic. So I think that's sort of just where folks landed on trying to provide some sort of oversight of facilities during this unusual time. Is it preferred and ideal? Absolutely not. And is it possible that you don't get a true and accurate assessment as you would when you're actually on site? Certainly. But it's the best we have at given the circumstances.
Do you plan more inspections of this nature in the coming months, or how can we remedy this, and what type of guidance can you give to the facilities to ensure that it's a more complete review?
So good question. I do think that as things stand currently, we're ODO is doing 2 of these inspections each year. So, I mean, it really just depends on how long we're in the midst of this pandemic, sort of in terms of how long, whether or not we're going to have to do this at least one more time before we're beyond this thing. But certainly get your point that, that you have some concerns and how these are being done. And I'll take that back and get with the team and see if there's anything we can do on our end to try to make sure that we get a good feel for conditions as they exist at the facilities, even if we're doing this remotely.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Can I ask briefly about the Office of Detention Ombudsman? The chairwoman's leadership and the committee's guidance created this office. Can you tell me how it's going, what the timelines and measurables are, and things that we need to know in order to make sure that office is staffed up and ready to help?
Sure, I can tell you what little bit I know. That is an office that reports directly to the secretary, so it's not an office that's under ICE's purview. I know that they've been doing quite a bit of hiring to beef up their staff, and they've been working closely with a lot of the other inspectional entities like CRCL and others that perform these audits to just understand sort of what their role is going to be and how they can sort of complement the process and program. So outside of that, I would just have to defer to the department since it reports to the secretary.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so Mr. Director, I wanted to continue on with my vaccine questions. What percentage of ICE detainees are fully vaccinated?
If I recall correctly, and don't quote me on this, I'll certainly I'll get you the precise numbers. But if I remember correctly, it's like 20% have had at least one shot. But let me confirm that that's the case.
Okay, you had testified that 1,229 detainees were fully vaccinated as of May 5th. We're just not sure what percentage of the total detained population that is. And we, based on the numbers that we have access to, believe that that's around 7%, but we really do ask that you follow up promptly with that number. I'm concerned because at 7%, that would lag far behind both the nation as a whole and at 20%, sir, because over 1/3 of American adults are fully vaccinated. And even the Federal Bureau of Prisons has 1/3 of their incarcerated people fully vaccinated. So can you speak about your plans or the administration's plans to get more shots in arms as quickly as possible?
So I do know, like I said, that our chief medical officer at the department is in court conversations with CDC to see if we can't just get our vaccines ourselves. In fact, I think there was just some email traffic maybe a day or so ago.
Perfect.
Potentially getting 20,000 vaccines. So I will get you an update on that and circle back.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Johnson, you testified that the administration's use of Title 42 is, quote, critical to your ability to implement social distancing in detention, and that your efforts and it's essential or critical to your efforts to prevent the spread of COVID-19, and that it would be undermined if the expulsions under Title 42 ended. In light of this concern, what are you doing to prepare for the eventual lifting of Title 42 restrictions?
We're preparing as best we can. I mean, we're talking to our transportation vendors to make sure we have the resources, capability, and capacity to move much larger numbers. We're making sure we have the sufficient PPE so that if we do need to move people by bus or by plane, that folks have the proper PPE. We're also looking at, whether or not there's some opportunities for us to move people to one location just so that they can be tested and quarantined before like sending them to a longer term facility. So there's a lot of ways or a lot of things that we're looking at just to figure out how best to deal with a huge number every single day, because it will be overwhelming and could put us in a tough spot really quickly.
Thank you. While the pandemic is an extraordinary circumstance, we can't continue expelling people forever. So it is imperative that we have a plan for keeping people safe and healthy. Mr. Johnson, you testified that, quote, it's a requirement that ICE test 100% of those who come into ICE custody for COVID-19. Specifically, you explained that all detainees are tested within 12 hours of admission to a facility, and then again before release from quarantine if they've been exposed to the virus. Are you currently fulfilling that requirement and testing 100% of detainees within 12 hours of admission, or are there cases where people are not tested within that time frame?
I am not aware of any instances where people are not being tested at this point in the process. I know that 6 months ago or 9 months ago, when we were early on, that there were still some capacity issues, but I think we've gotten past those hurdles at this point.
And how frequently are detainees tested after initial intake and quarantine?
It varies by facility. I know at our ICE-owned facilities, we try to test, do saturation testing at least like quarterly, if I remember correctly. But let me take that as a get back. As far as the local, state and local jails, I'm sure it's all over the place, and there's very little inconsistency about how frequency they do saturation testing.
Okay, well, detention centers aren't islands. The staff and contractors who come in and out every day can and do bring the virus with them. We know from the New York Times that they've linked numerous outbreaks within ICE detention centers to then having community spread in the surrounding area. So it's really important that guards are tested frequently in addition to the detainees. And we will follow up with you about the guard testing. I yield back.
That completes the second round. Before we adjourn, Director Johnson, I just want to bring your attention to the Unified Immigration Portal, which we funded to enable agencies like ICE to get information about migrants released directly by CBP. Perhaps that could be helpful in giving you some of the information that you need based on the questions that were asked. If there are no more questions, Acting Director, thank you so much for your time and for helping us think through these challenges. One second, please. Oh, I have just been informed that Ms. Henson would like to add something. Ms. Henson?
And I'll be quick. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to follow up, Director Johnson, on this memo specifically. Did you or your staff write this? And if not, who wrote it?
You're referring to the February 18 memo?
Correct.
Yes, me and my staff wrote it.
You wrote it. Did you and your experts at ICE go through it and look to make sure that it was either justified or conflicted with what your role is? I mean, did you find any conflicting? You said you weren't worried, but was there any part of it in that guidance that you felt was conflicted with your mission?
So look, that memo was drafted following the January 21 secretary, at that time, acting secretary memo. So this was the guidance that was required to sort of come out as a result of that January 21 memo. Now, this is just interim, and we are working on our final guidance. So there's certainly some issues or some areas in this particular February 18 memo that I would change, and that we will change once we issue the final draft. But based on the timeline that we needed to get out our guidance, that's sort of where we landed, and it is interim, and I'm sure it'll be improved.
What's your time frame for getting that final guidance? That's my last question, Madam Chair.
That's okay.
I mean, the discussions continue every day. We were hoping to get something out here within the next week or two, but it could be, you know, a month. It could be 6 weeks. I mean, that's my best guess right now.
All right. All right. Thank you, Director, and I appreciate the extra time, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, you're muted.
Ms. Underwood.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for the additional time. Mr. Johnson, do you have the authority to require testing for guards and other staff at all detention facilities?
To require testing?
Yeah, COVID testing.
I can't require testing of detainees. So I don't know that I can require testing of the contract guard staff. So that's a question I'll just need to run by our legal folks to know for sure. But for some reason, I don't think so.
Okay, well, I'm really concerned about that limitation, sir. If you would please provide the committee with a written explanation of the legal or contractual limitations that might prevent you from requiring COVID-19 tests for staff and contractors at the ICE detention facilities.
Will do.
Okay, thank you. Testing is critical for protecting your workforce and the people in your custody and the communities where your facilities are located. I certainly look forward to working with you to fill this need. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for the extra time, and I yield back.
Okay, Director, once again, thank you very much for your time. I will be submitting additional questions for the record, which I hope we'll get a quick response on. The Subcommittee on Homeland Security now stands adjourned.